Millionaire promised the world to his mistress but forgot his pregnant wife's birthday. Meet Alexander Van Doren, a self-made millionaire, so used to getting everything he wants that he's forgotten how much it costs others. His life is a tapestry of luxurious galas, glittering diamonds, and secret rendezvous. But beneath the polished veneer, he's about to discover that a man who can buy the world might lose what truly matters most. Driven by obsession, he dares to promise the world to his radiant mistress, all while ignoring the quiet heartbreak of his pregnant wife. When a forgotten birthday sets off a chain of cataclysmic events, Alexander's world careens toward disaster. Secrets will unravel, loyalties will shatter, and no amount of money can save him now. Alexander Van Doren was, by all appearances, the perfect portrait of success. He was lean, tall, and strikingly handsome, with sharp blue eyes that seemed to pierce through whoever stood before him. His family name carried weight, but his true fortune was self-made, a sprawling real estate empire built upon a single risky investment he'd made at just 24 years old. By 30, he had multiplied that fortune 100-fold. Now, at 36, he was poised to double it yet again. He lived in the affluent enclave of Westbridge Hills, where gated mansions lined the streets like jewels in a crown. Neighbors spoke his name in hushed tones, a mix of envy and admiration. He had everything he wanted, or so it seemed. The truth was, in the silent corners of his life, dissatisfaction brewed like a storm. Alexander craved excitement, an addiction to adrenaline, and the thrill of conquering every obstacle. His wife, Catherine Van Doren, was the epitome of dignity and grace. Once an aspiring poet, she had traded her ambitions for the life of a corporate wife, attending charity events and nodding dutifully by her husband's side. Despite her own silent yearnings, Catherine held steadfastly to love and loyalty. She was 9 months pregnant with their first child, her belly a gentle curve that symbolized a long, cherished dream, but the glow that once marked her features had dimmed in recent months, replaced by worry lines carved from loneliness and suspicion. The tension in the mansion was palpable. Lately, Alexander had seemed preoccupied, spending many nights in his study or at business meetings. Catherine had begun to wonder, had she done something wrong? Was the pregnancy too much for him? Or perhaps there was someone else occupying that space in his heart. She tried to dismiss the thought, but women's intuition rarely lies dormant for long. Then came an innocent hint of reality that Catherine couldn't ignore. One night, while searching for her car keys, she found a receipt for an extremely expensive bracelet in Alexander's jacket pocket. Engraved on it was a message that read, "For my shining star, A.V." Now, Catherine's name had no V in it, and though the initials matched her husband, the note looked suspiciously intimate. Panic churned inside her, but she told herself it could be for business, perhaps a thank you gift for an investor or something along those lines. Yet the seed of doubt took root. In the days that followed, Catherine became more observant. She noticed Alexander's phone lighting up late at night with texts from someone named AP. She noticed the hush in his voice whenever he answered these calls. She felt the distance, colder than any winter frost, growing between them. But still, she tried to hope, to believe that once the baby arrived, everything would fall back into place. Little did she know that delicate facade of normalcy was on the brink of shattering, sending the Van Doren household into turmoil from which it might never recover. Anastasia Pierce was Alexander's secret, a secret that roared like a wildfire beneath the surface of his otherwise controlled existence. She was a striking woman with raven hair and emerald green eyes that seemed to sparkle with mischievous curiosity. In many ways, she was the polar opposite of Catherine, yet she carried a certain allure that Alexander found irresistible. They'd met 6 months ago at a fundraising gala for the Westbridge Hills Arts Council, a place Alexander had attended more out of obligation than genuine interest. Yet upon spotting Anastasia across the room, her laughter echoing, her slender figure accentuated by a simple but elegant black dress, he'd felt a spark he could not ignore. Their first encounter was innocent enough. She'd merely introduced herself, praising his charitable contributions to local youth art programs. One drink led to another, and conversation flowed like a well-aged wine. Soon they were meeting under hushed arrangements at an upscale lounge downtown, away from the prying eyes of Westbridge Hills. They told themselves it was just a harmless flirtation, but lines blurred quickly. Anastasia was no naive college girl enamored by wealth. She was a sophisticated woman who had carved a path in the art world, curating exhibitions and traveling extensively. She was used to attention and men with money. Yet something about Alexander tugged at her heartstrings more intensely than she'd anticipated. Perhaps it was the subtle vulnerability lurking behind his confident exterior, or maybe it was his magnetic aura of possibility. He made lavish promises, whispered in her ear about a future filled with travel, romance, and a place of her own in his heart. She believed, or at least wanted to believe, that these promises were real. But as the months unfolded, Anastasia found herself catching glimpses of Alexander's deeper complexities, his restlessness, his unspoken burdens, and the ring that still glinted on his left hand whenever he forgot to take it off in her presence. She often wondered about Catherine, but Alexander's dismissals were always the same. It's complicated. She doesn't understand me like you do, or we're practically living separate lives now. He insisted a divorce was on the horizon, painting an image of a marriage that was more a business arrangement than a union of hearts. Stolen weekends in Montauk, secret lunches in hidden bistros, midnight phone calls brimming with passion. It was easy for Anastasia to lose herself in the fantasy. She craved the adrenaline too, thriving on the illicit thrill, but deep down, she yearned for stability. She wanted to be more than just a hidden mistress. She believed Alexander when he promised that soon it would just be the two of them. Now, with Catherine's pregnancy nearing its final weeks, the pressure mounted. Alexander was starting to show signs of agitation. He was jumpy, glancing at his phone every few minutes, always on alert. Anastasia felt the simmer of urgency in their conversations, as if a storm was about to break, yet she held fast to the illusions he'd spun around her. After all, he was Alexander Van Doren, the brilliant millionaire who had never failed in any venture. If anyone could make impossible dreams come true, it had to be him. What she didn't know was that behind the bravado, Alexander was dancing on thin ice, and every step threatened to plunge them all into the freezing darkness beneath. Back at the Van Doren mansion, the tension thickened with every passing day. Catherine's due date edged closer, and with it came a surge of emotional fragility. She found herself fending off swirling anxieties about motherhood, about her marriage, and about the unspeakable secret she feared might be unfolding before her very eyes. She tried to confront Alexander at dinner one night, choosing her words carefully, desperate for reassurance. "Alex," she began softly, tracing the rim of her glass of water, "I feel like we're drifting. Is something on your mind?" He looked up from his phone, seemingly startled. "What makes you say that?" "I've just been busy at work. You know how it is," he replied, offering the faintest of smiles. His eyes, however, revealed no warmth. Catherine pressed on, uncertain if she should mention the bracelet receipt or the mysterious late-night texts. But she stopped short, her heart hammered, fearing that speaking the words aloud would make them irrevocably real. She settled instead for a whispered question. "Don't you think we should spend more time together before the baby arrives? Maybe a short trip, just us?" Alexander grimaced slightly. The very thought of stepping away from his swirling entanglements, business deals. His affair seemed like a burden. "We'll have time," he said tersely, returning his attention to his phone as if the conversation had already ended. That night, Catherine wept silently in bed while Alexander dozed off in his office, lulled by spreadsheets and clandestine messages from Anastasia. The future that once promised warmth and familial bliss was turning cold. If only Catherine had known how complicated things were behind the scenes. Days later, an ominous cloud settled over Westbridge Hills, literally and figuratively. A slow-moving storm churned in the Atlantic, threatening to drench the coastline in torrential rain. The local news couldn't stop warning about flash floods and hurricane-force winds. Yet the warnings did little to shift the course of the emotional storm taking shape within the Van Doren circle. For while Catherine was preparing for a baby, Anastasia was preparing to claim what she believed was rightfully hers. She'd grown restless with Alexander's excuses. Why did he refuse to make their relationship public? Why did he keep delaying the big talk about leaving Catherine? The frustration swelled into resentment, and resentment gave birth to bold decisions. Late one evening, she texted Alexander, "Anastasia, we need to talk, face to face. I want answers." But answers were not something Alexander was prepared to give just yet. His business deals were teetering on critical negotiations. A lucrative land development near Charleston was about to net him tens of millions. He needed to maintain focus, to keep his composure. He responded curtly, "Alexander, soon, my star. I promise. Just need to wrap up a few things." Anastasia read the message and felt a swirl of conflicting emotions: hope, anger, longing. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being strung along. Perhaps it was time to make Alexander see that she wasn't a mere accessory. Maybe she should make a bold appearance at the Van Doren mansion or confront him at his office. But would that risk losing him entirely? Fear and determination wrestled in her mind. Meanwhile, Catherine found herself alone in the mansion more often. She tried to distract herself by tidying the nursery, a serene space painted in soft green, with a crib made from the finest wood. But emptiness lingered in every corner of that grand house. She quietly decided that if Alexander wouldn't share his burdens with her, she'd uncover the truth on her own. Little did any of them realize that the approaching literal storm was merely a harbinger of the chaos and heartbreak that awaited. Catherine's birthday arrived on a day marked by incessant rainfall. Wind whipped the trees in the Van Doren estate's expansive garden, scattering leaves across the marble driveway. The storm had intensified overnight, and the weather mirrored Catherine's inner turmoil. She'd never been one to demand grand gestures or expensive gifts. A simple, heartfelt acknowledgement would have sufficed. In years past, Alexander would lavish her with roses, jewelry, or romantic dinners in five-star restaurants. They would dance, laugh, and talk about their shared dreams. Yet this year, as the sun struggled to break through the storm clouds, there was no sign of Alexander. Not even a text message. Catherine rose early, heart fluttering with a faint optimism. Perhaps he planned a surprise? She had to allow him that benefit of the doubt. She showered, dressed in a loose, comfortable sweater that stretched over her pregnant belly, and tiptoed downstairs. The house was silent, echoing her hopes back to her in empty hushes. By mid-morning, her phone remained quiet. No calls, no texts, just the relentless pounding of the rain on the windows. She sipped tea alone in the spacious living room, trying not to let her tears overflow. The day dragged on, each hour a cruel reminder that the man she loved was too lost in his own world to remember something as simple as her birthday. And where was Alexander? He was in an upscale penthouse suite downtown, far from the prying eyes of Westbridge Hills. A last-minute business conference call had turned into a celebratory lunch with potential investors. And that lunch turned into an impromptu dinner. Throughout it all, he was accompanied by Anastasia. She'd demanded a face-to-face meeting to discuss their future, and Alexander, hoping to placate her, invited her to the city under the guise of business. In the plush intimacy of that penthouse, they shared whispered confidences and sipped champagne. Anastasia prodded him about the timeline for his divorce, pressing harder than she ever had before. Her green eyes burned with resolve. "You keep saying you'll leave Catherine. You said you'd do it before the baby arrived, so we could start our life. But time's running out, Alexander." He swallowed hard, scanning the room as if searching for an exit. "Things are complicated, Anna. You know that," he said, employing the gentle tone he used whenever he tried to calm her. "Once this business deal closes, I'll make the final move, I promise." Thunder rumbled in the distance, lightning splitting the sky. A flicker of guilt surfaced in Alexander's eyes, but he quickly suppressed it. His phone buzzed on the coffee table, but he ignored it. He was too ensnared by Anastasia's allure, too intoxicated by the escape she provided. He never once glanced at the date or realized its importance. Even as night fell, Catherine's phone remained silent of any birthday wishes from her husband. Alone in a darkened living room, the storm raging outside her windows, she made a promise to herself after the baby was born. She would confront Alexander directly. No more doubts or uncertainties. She wanted the truth, whether it shattered her heart or not. For Alexander, this single oversight for getting his pregnant wife's birthday would prove to be the first domino in a cascade of devastating consequences. The morning after Catherine's forgotten birthday, the storm had finally abated, but the atmosphere within the Van Doren mansion remained suffused with tension. Catherine woke up feeling numb. She hadn't slept well. Every time she closed her eyes, memories of happier birthdays flooded her consciousness. She remembered how Alexander once surprised her with a hot air balloon ride, how he serenaded her on a whim. Now, that seemed like another lifetime. She mustered the courage to confront him, but found the master bedroom empty. In his usual spot on the nightstand, Alexander's phone was missing. So was he. Instead, she found a terse note, "Had an early meeting. Don't wait up." The words stung like a slap to the face. Her birthday gone, unacknowledged. She wondered if he even remembered now. By noon, Catherine decided she could no longer ignore her suspicions. She needed proof, solid evidence of Alexander's infidelity. Gathering her resolve, she went to his home office. It was a spacious room, lined with dark wooden shelves and encyclopedias of business strategies, with a large mahogany desk dominating the center. In that desk was a locked drawer. She'd seen him open a few times, always discreetly. Her heart pounded as she rifled through his keys until she found the small one that fit. The drawer clicked open to reveal a stack of documents. Nestled among them was a small black journal with handwritten notes and receipts tucked into the pages. She flipped through quickly, eyes widening at what she saw, travel itineraries to luxury hotels. She had never stayed in with him. Designer shopping receipts for items far too intimate to be for business associates. And pictures. Selfies he'd taken with Anastasia in fancy restaurants, at art exhibits, and once on a yacht, each one capturing their secret world. Catherine's breath caught in her throat as she studied the woman in the photos. Anastasia was stunning everything. Catherine had once been, perhaps. But it wasn't just jealousy that roiled in Catherine's gut. It was betrayal, heartbreak, and a fierce determination. She now had confirmation of her husband's double life. Tears filled her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not yet. Footsteps in the hallway jolted her, and she hastily shoved everything back into the drawer, locking it. She could barely compose herself when Alexander walked in, a troubled expression on his face. "Kath, what are you doing in here?" he asked, noticing her tremor. She closed her eyes, took a shaky breath, and turned to face him. For a moment, neither spoke. Catherine was torn between accusing him outright and preserving the little dignity she had left. In the end, she said, "We need to talk," her voice steadied by an undercurrent of rage and heartbreak. Alexander looked uneasy. "Yes, we do, but maybe later. I have important calls." "Important calls?" she echoed, her voice edged with anger. "What about my birthday, Alexander? Or does that not matter anymore?" He seemed genuinely startled, a flash of realization crossing his face. "Catherine, I'm sorry. It slipped my mind with all the chaos at work. She held up a hand, cutting him off. "Don't, just don't." "We'll talk tonight," she said, her voice quivering with hurt, but also steeled by knowledge. With that, she brushed past him, leaving Alexander to grapple with the first stirrings of real guilt. What neither of them could predict was just how explosive that evening's conversation would be and how its repercussions would extend far beyond the walls of their mansion. Night descended on Westbridge Hills with a certain heaviness, as if the air itself braced for an impending confrontation. Catherine spent the day locked in a mental tug-of-war. Her heart wept for the marriage she once had, yet her mind screamed for answers, resolution, no matter how painful it might be. By the time Alexander returned home, she was waiting in the living room, perched on the edge of the couch like a sentinel. The room was awash in the dim glow of a single lamp, casting dramatic shadows on the walls. Catherine's expression was resolute, her posture poised. "We talk now," she said firmly the moment he stepped inside. Alexander set down his briefcase and loosened his tie, looking as though he'd rather be anywhere else. But there was no escaping. Not this time. Catherine wasted no time. She retrieved the stack of incriminating documents and photographs from the desk drawer, laying them out on the coffee table like evidence in a courtroom. "Do you want to explain these?" she asked, her voice heartbreakingly calm. Alexander froze, color draining from his face. He glanced at the images of him and Anastasia, the receipts, the notes scrawled in the little black journal. Lies dangled on the tip of his tongue, but he could no longer pretend. "Catherine, who is she?" Catherine's voice cracked, just enough to reveal her underlying pain. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing the room. "Her name is Anastasia Pierce. We met some months ago." It was never supposed to go this far. Catherine's eyes glistened with tears she fought to hold back. "But it did. And you chose her over your own wife, your pregnant wife. Why, Alexander?" She waited, but no meaningful excuse came. "Have you even considered the stress you're putting on me, on our child?" Alexander pinched the bridge of his nose, shame mingling with frustration. "Catherine, I'm sorry. My life. It felt like it was missing something. I couldn't control it. Everything just spiraled. Missing something," Catherine repeated, her voice choked with emotion. "We built a life together, and I'm carrying your child. And you say you're missing something?" He had no answer that would satisfy her. The room reverberated with silence until Catherine finally spoke again. "You need to decide, Alexander. I'm not going to share you with anyone. If you want this marriage, if you want to be a father, you have to cut her out of your life. Completely." Alexander stared at the floor, weighed down by 1,000 unspoken fears. He thought of Anastasia's piercing green eyes, her effervescent laughter, the sense of forbidden freedom she awakened in him. But he also thought of Catherine's steady heart, her unwavering love, and the unborn child he had a duty to protect. The decision was monstrous, yet also straightforward. Family or mistress? "I need time," he whispered finally, afraid to look Catherine in the eye. "You have until tomorrow," she said, not unkindly. "Otherwise, I'll do what I have to do for myself and for this baby." Alexander nodded, the gravity of her words crashing over him. He turned away, unable to face the devastation etched on her features. As he climbed the grand staircase to their bedroom, he felt as though each step carried him closer to a decision that would reshape his life forever. But fate as it often does, had other, more dramatic plans in store. Anastasia Pierce had reached her breaking point. The night before, she and Alexander had exchanged tense text messages. His vague reassurances did little to calm her growing apprehension. A new fear clutched at her heart. What if Alexander never truly intended to leave Catherine? What if all his promises were just a mirage, dangling before her to keep her interested while he juggled a double life? In a moment of reckless determination, Anastasia decided to force Alexander's hand. She dressed in a tailored navy trench coat, stepping out into the drizzly morning air, and hailed a taxi to Westbridge Hills. The journey felt eternal. Nervous energy sparked in her chest as the suburban scenery glided by a realm of manicured lawns and million-dollar estates. So quiet, it was almost unnerving. She clutched her phone, ignoring a series of missed calls from Alexander. Let him worry, she thought grimly. Arriving at the Van Doren mansion, she stepped out onto the gravel driveway, her heels crunching ominously. The mansion loomed before her, a testament to the wealth and power that Alexander commanded. If he truly wanted a life with her, he had to be honest. She squared her shoulders and marched to the front door, ringing the bell with a steely determination. It was Catherine who opened it. The two women locked eyes for a moment. Catherine, heavily pregnant, was taken aback by the visitor's striking beauty and unwavering stare. Recognition dawned on her face. She'd seen that face in the photos. Instantly, her heart pounded like a war drum. Anastasia Pierce, the woman, introduced herself, barely managing the politeness to offer a tight, thin-lipped smile. "I'm here to see Alexander." Catherine inhaled a trembling breath. So this was the woman who had disrupted her life. Anger roiled beneath her outward composure. "Alexander isn't home," Catherine said icily, stepping aside to block any attempt of entry. "Then I'll wait," Anastasia replied, her voice resolute. She took a daring step forward, as if challenging Catherine to stop her. The tension in the foyer was suffocating. Catherine's fists clenched involuntarily. "You have no right to be here," she hissed. "You've already caused enough harm." Anastasia met her gaze, anger flaring in her emerald eyes. "Listen, Catherine," she said, her tone unyielding. "I know this is painful, but I'm not the only one responsible. Alexander led me on. He promised me." Catherine cut her off, voice quavering with a mix of rage and despair. "Promised you what? A life together? A future? And what about my future? Our child's future?" In that moment, both women realized how intricately their fates had become entwined by one man's lies. The confrontation escalated into a chaotic exchange of accusations and heartbreak, culminating in a stark ultimatum from Anastasia: "If Alexander doesn't choose me, I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of man he really is." Before Catherine could respond, headlights swept over the driveway as Alexander's car pulled in. He stepped out, shock painted all over his face at the sight of the two women. His mistress and his wife, both pregnant, with questions, accusations, demands, stood mere feet apart, and he was the linchpin in this entire, spiraling disaster. Little did Alexander realize the damage was already done, and that destiny had yet another cruel twist waiting around the corner. The wind picked up again as storm clouds gathered above Westbridge Hills, painting the sky a deep grey. Alexander hurried to the front steps, his heart pounding from the moment he recognized Anastasia's sleek figure standing face to face with Catherine. "Alexander," Anastasia said stiffly, hands balled at her sides. Her eyes flicked to Catherine's pregnant belly, then back to him. "We need to talk." "Inside," Catherine added, her voice cold. "Now." Alexander could scarcely breathe under the weight of their combined fury. He led them to the living room, a space usually reserved for elegant gatherings and polite conversation. Today, it felt like the stage for a tragic showdown. The air crackled with tension as they stood in a triangle, Catherine by the grand piano, Anastasia near the fireplace. and Alexander between them, his expression etched with desperation. He turned to Anastasia first. "What are you doing here? This is my home. You can't just—" She cut him off with a raised hand. "Don't you dare scold me. You've been avoiding me, dodging my questions. You promised me a life, a future. I deserve an explanation." Catherine's gaze was laser-focused on Alexander. "So it's true. She came to stake her claim in our home, Alexander." Her voice trembled with unmasked hurt. "Did you even think about what this would do to me? To your child?" Alexander's head swiveled from one to the other, panic shining in his eyes. "Catherine, Anastasia, this got out of control. I never wanted to hurt either of you. Yet here we are." Anastasia fired back. "Stop pretending you're some helpless bystander. You orchestrated this. You promised me a fresh start, and now you're looking at me like I'm a stranger." Silence smothered the room. Catherine found her breath uneven, anxiety pressing down on her like a vise. She spoke slowly, trying to maintain composure. "You told me last night you needed time. Well, time's up. Choose now, Alexander. Tell her to leave and cut ties for good, or we're done." The ultimatum hung in the air, a loaded gun aimed at the fragile life he'd built. Alexander looked at Anastasia, whose jaw was set in defiance. Then he turned to Catherine, her eyes dark with betrayal, one hand protectively resting on her belly. A swirl of images raced through his mind. The vow he'd taken with Catherine, the child that was mere weeks away from coming into the world, the nights of stolen passion with Anastasia, the promises he'd made in whispered hushes. His throat felt dry as desert sand. He paused, swallowed. "I choose Catherine. This is my family. I can't abandon my wife and our baby." Anastasia recoiled as though slapped. "You're making a mistake," she said, voice shaking. "You told me you were unhappy, that you wanted out." Alexander closed his eyes. Maybe I said things in the heat of the moment, but it's over. We're done, Anastasia." Tears welled in Anastasia's eyes. Part of her had expected this answer, but hearing it aloud shattered her illusions. She shot Catherine a look that was equal parts fury and sorrow. "You think you've won?" she said in a voice strangled by heartbreak. "He'll do it again. Men like Alexander never change." With that, she spun on her heel and headed for the door, leaving Alexander and Catherine in the hush of aftermath. But even as the door slammed shut, Catherine could not find relief. Instead, a deep, unsettling dread settled in her chest. Something in Anastasia's parting words, in her aura of steely resolve, warned that this was far from over. In the days that followed, Alexander tried to make amends, but Catherine's trust had been severely eroded. She went through the motions, allowing him to accompany her to doctor appointments, letting him place a comforting hand on her shoulder, but he could sense the emotional chasm that now divided them. The staff at the mansion tried to maintain a veneer of normalcy, but whispers circulated. Servants exchanged nervous glances. The air felt fraught with unspoken truths and dangerous secrets. For Alexander, guilt was a relentless spectre. He took extended leaves from his work, passing off responsibilities to his junior partners so he could focus on repairing his marriage. But whenever Catherine caught him texting on his phone, her face would darken, consumed by the bitter memory of his betrayal. Sensing her suspicion, Alexander tried to distance himself from anything that might link him back to Anastasia. He blocked her number, deleted their photos, and tried to bury every trace of her existence. But forgetting is often easier said than done. Meanwhile, Anastasia seethed in her small condo across town, nursing the wounds of rejection. She ruminated over every promise Alexander had made, every glance, every caress. Had it all been a lie? Or had Catherine's pregnancy forced him into a corner he couldn't escape? Yet she refused to accept that her relationship with Alexander was truly finished. She told herself that men like him rarely stayed in the straight and narrow for long. All she needed was a moment, a single slip-up, to wedge herself back into his life, or at least to exact some measure of revenge for the heartbreak. On a particularly sleepless night, she scrolled through her phone, pausing at a saved voicemail from Alexander, left weeks ago. His voice was low, seductive, sweet as honey. "You're my shining star, Anna. I can't wait to build the life we've been dreaming about." She replayed it several times, tears of rage blurring her vision. Finally, with trembling fingers, she forwarded the voicemail to Catherine's email address, found on the Van Doren Foundation's official website. No note, no explanation, just raw evidence of Alexander's duplicity. Let Catherine decide how to interpret it. When Catherine woke the next morning, she found the voicemail in her inbox. Listening to it felt like ripping open barely healed wounds. She stared at her phone in disbelief, the numbness giving way to anger. Alexander was still asleep beside her, oblivious to her discovery. She wanted to wake him, to scream, to demand why he had ever said those words. But she fought the urge. Instead, she slipped out of bed and walked to the nursery. The pastel walls, the mobile gently spinning over the crib, all reminded her of what was at stake, her baby's future. Sighing, she sank into the rocking chair, the phone screen casting a pale glow in the dim morning light. She was tired physically, emotionally, spiritually, tired of feeling powerless. A plan began to form in her mind. If Alexander had indeed ended things, then Anastasia's meddling might be an act of desperation. But if he was lying, Catherine intended to find out. No more half measures. She was determined to lay this entire mess bare, consequences be damned. A new storm system rolled over the coast, lightning slicing the sky in eerie flashes. The thunder echoed like a premonition of chaos yet to come. Catherine decided she couldn't wait any longer. She approached Alexander in his study, face solemn, heart pounding. "We need to talk," she said, her voice devoid of the softness he once loved. The man across from her looked fatigued, but she showed little sympathy. He nodded, shutting his laptop. "What is it, Kath?" She held up her phone, her gaze cold. "Anastasia forwarded me a voicemail. From you." Alexander's face tightened, a flicker of panic in his eyes. "Catherine, that's old. Before I decided to fix things with you, I swear. Then why is she sending it now?" Catherine demanded, forcing her rising anger down. "Are you still in contact?" "No," he said firmly. "I told you. I ended it. She won't leave me alone. She's upset." Catherine wanted to believe him, but trust had become a fragile concept in her life. "I'm giving you one chance to prove you're telling the truth," she said. "Meet with Anastasia face to face. Make it clear, once and for all, that she has no place in our lives. That might be the only way she'll stop harassing us." Alexander swallowed hard. He imagined Anastasia's pleading eyes, the swirl of unspoken sorrow between them. But Catherine was right. There was no other way to end this cleanly. "Fine," he said, his voice tinged with resignation. "I'll do it. On one condition, you come with me. Let there be no confusion." Catherine paused. The idea of confronting her husband's mistress again filled her with dread, but perhaps this was the closure they needed. "All right," she agreed quietly. "We'll do it together." That evening, a meeting was arranged at a neutral location, a private lounge in a boutique hotel. Downtown, quiet enough for discreet conversation. Rain hammered against the windows as the trio converged. Anastasia arrived first, nursing a glass of wine at a corner table. Catherine and Alexander appeared moments later, side by side but maintaining a formal distance. Alexander wasted no time. "Anna," he said tightly, "this needs to end. We're done. I'm choosing my family." Anastasia's eyes flickered with wounded pride. She made a visible effort to remain composed, though her voice quivered. "Are you sure, Alex? After everything we shared?" Catherine stiffened, her arms crossed. "He's sure," she cut in, refusing to be intimidated. "We both are." The lounge was nearly empty, their voices resonating with a tense intimacy. Anastasia inhaled sharply, as if grappling with her next words. "Fine," she said, forcing a shrug. "But I didn't come here to beg. I came to warn you. If you think I'm going to disappear quietly, you're mistaken." Lightning illuminated the windows, revealing streaks of rain that smeared the night sky. Catherine's heart hammered. "What are you talking about?" Anastasia leaned forward, her green eyes narrowing. "Alexander promised me more than just sweet words. He made business deals in my name, gave me insider information. It's all documented, Catherine. I could ruin him or your precious Van Doren name if I wanted to." Alexander paled. "Anna, you wouldn't," he whispered, realizing the depth of the betrayal he'd enabled. A bitter smile tugged at Anastasia's lips. "Don't corner a wounded animal, darling. You never know how vicious it might become." The flash of lightning outside was blinding, followed by a crack of thunder so loud it rattled the chandelier overhead. In that moment, all pretense of civility shattered, and Catherine realized that the storms raging within their lives were far from over. The next morning brought a jarring sense of urgency. Catherine woke early, anxiety dancing across her heart. She paced the corridors of the Van Doren mansion, imagining the headlines if Anastasia unleashed her secrets. Alexander's shady dealings might become a public spectacle, and their child would be born into a maelstrom of scandal. She recalled every charity event, every press conference, every philanthropic project that bore the Van Doren name. Reputations could be destroyed in a single headline, but her concerns went beyond image. She feared for Alexander's mental state. Though she resented him for his betrayal, she also recognized that his world had been built on high stakes and risk-taking. If everything came crashing down, would he survive the fall? Meanwhile, Alexander was consumed with damage control. He made frantic calls to his attorneys, his business associates, even calling in favors from local politicians. All the while, he refused to look Catherine in the eye, as if the shame of his affair and the fear of public ruin were more than he could bear. Just when Catherine thought she'd seen the worst, a stern knock sounded at the mansion's front door. A courier arrived with a sealed envelope addressed to Alexander. Inside, they found copies of files implicating him in insider trading and shady property acquisitions documents that bore Anastasia's name in key places. A handwritten note in flamboyant cursive was included. "Decide how this ends, AP." Alexander sank into a leather armchair, burying his face in his hands. "She's not bluffing," he whispered, voice trembling. "I gave her access to some deals. She knows everything." Catherine's mind whirled. She felt a rush of anger, betrayal, and dread. "Why, Alex? Why risk everything we've built?" He looked up at her, hollow-eyed. "Because I thought I was invincible, unstoppable. I got caught up in the thrill of it all. Now it's over." Catherine inhaled sharply, feeling a wave of dizziness. She pressed a hand to her belly, steadying herself. The baby was due any day now, and she realized she needed to protect herself and their child. "We can't let her blackmail us," she said resolutely. "We have to go to the authorities or fight this head-on, or..." The conversation was interrupted by her sudden gasp. A sharp pain rippled through her abdomen, and she doubled over. Alexander rushed to her side, eyes flaring in alarm. "What's wrong? My water broke," Catherine managed between labored breaths. "It's time." Panic surged through Alexander. Everything else, Anastasia, the documents, the scandal, became secondary. He scooped Catherine into his arms, shouting for the driver to bring the car around. Within minutes, they were racing to the hospital, the tension of the mansion left behind, replaced by a new fear that Catherine and the baby might face complications. Yet even as they sped through the rain-slicked streets, one thought pulsed in Catherine's mind. Anastasia's threat still loomed. and nothing, not even the miracle of birth, could fully eclipse the darkness that had infiltrated their lives. She clung to Alexander's hand, uncertain whether this child's birth would bring them together or tear them apart once and for all. The drive to Westbridge Hills Medical Centre felt like a fever dream for Catherine. Every bump in the road sent a jolt of pain through her abdomen, and the contractions were coming fast, each wave sharper than the last. Alexander gripped the steering wheel with knuckles turned white, adrenaline coursing through his veins. Their previous worries, Anastasia's blackmail, the precarious business deals, receded in the urgency of impending parenthood. Upon arrival, nurses quickly wheeled Catherine into a private labor suite, and Alexander followed close behind. Alarms beeped softly in the background, the fluorescent lights lending the corridor a harsh brightness that only amplified Catherine's vulnerability. A flurry of medical staff attended her, checking vitals, hooking her up to monitors that tracked the baby's heartbeat. The rhythm was strong, steady, a reassuring sign that even amid this chaos, new life persisted. Alexander hovered at the bedside, stroking Catherine's hair as she breathed through the contractions. Tears shimmered in his eyes. "I'm sorry," he whispered, so quietly that she almost didn't hear. "I'm sorry for everything." Catherine looked into his face, searching for sincerity. Despite the pain, she managed a nod, acknowledging at least the sincerity of the moment, if not full forgiveness just yet. "Let's get through this first," she murmured, her voice tight with discomfort. And so began the longest hours of their lives. Each contraction felt like a crescendo, Catherine's breathing ragged as she tried to focus on the coaching from the obstetrician. Alexander offered her ice chips, whispered encouragement, and rubbed her back. In those moments, the memory of Anastasia and the documents receded, replaced by an all-consuming devotion to bringing their child into the world safely. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the doctor announced it was time for Catherine to push. She summoned every ounce of strength in her body, the pressure building to an almost unbearable peak. Lightning flashed outside the hospital windows, thunder rolling in a dramatic underscore to the miracle and madness of the evening. Alexander held her hand, pressing his forehead against hers, tears running down both their cheeks. One final push, and the room filled with the piercing cry of a newborn. Catherine collapsed back against the pillows, gasping. The world slowed as a nurse carefully wrapped the tiny, squirming infant in a soft blanket, then placed the baby in Catherine's arms. "It's a girl," the nurse announced, smiling warmly. The baby's cries softened as she felt her mother's warmth and her father's trembling hand gently stroking her cheek. In that moment, Catherine and Alexander locked eyes. A silent understanding passed between them, a recognition that, despite the betrayals and lies, they had created something precious. For the first time in months, hope flickered in Catherine's chest, even if it was fragile and overshadowed by the storms awaiting them outside the hospital walls. For a brief time, the world paused. Friends and family, those who hadn't already distanced themselves, sent congratulations. Nurses praised the baby's health. The newborn slept peacefully in a bassinet beside Catherine's bed, and Alexander found himself watching in awe, as if seeing true beauty for the first time. But reality waited, patient and unrelenting. On the second day of Catherine's hospital stay, Alexander stepped out to take a call from his lawyer. It was confirmed. Anastasia had indeed sent copies of incriminating documents to various media outlets, all set to publish unless Alexander met her demands. She wanted a substantial sum of money, enough to set her up for life, and a public apology that admitted no wrongdoing on her part but tarnished his own credibility. Alexander felt the walls closing in. He could pay her off, but it wouldn't end the speculation or the rumors. Worse, it would deplete his liquidity at a critical moment, possibly sabotaging the Charleston development deal. On the other hand, if he refused, he risked being charged with insider trading, an offense that could ruin him financially and legally. His mind reeled as he stared at the sterile hospital corridor, where the faint smell of antiseptic mingled with his own cold sweat. Returning to Catherine's side, he found her resting, the baby swaddled in her arms. He hesitated, torn between burdening her and wanting to share the weight. Guilt gnawed at him. Eventually, he told her everything. Catherine's first reaction was shock, followed swiftly by anger. But as she looked down at her sleeping daughter, a fierce, protective instinct overshadowed all else. "We can't let her destroy this family," she said firmly. "You need to fight back, but do it the right way." Alexander nodded, tears threatening to betray his composure. "I don't know how," he admitted. "The law is on her side if she has proof." Catherine set her jaw. "Then we need to find proof that she manipulated you too. Something that shows she isn't an innocent victim. Doesn't she have any skeletons in her closet?" A spark of possibility flickered in Alexander's eyes. Anastasia had once boasted about bending rules in her art curation business, forging documents to smuggle rare artifacts. Could that be leveraged? He wasn't sure. Still, the notion of exposing Anastasia's wrongdoing carried its own risks and moral dilemmas. Desperate times call for desperate measures. Alexander reached out to an old acquaintance, Daniel Remington, a tech-savvy investor who owed him a favor from their early days in real estate. Daniel was known for keeping hush-hush about grey area tasks, often skirting legal lines to get what he needed. Alexander felt a wave of distaste for resorting to such alliances, but the alternative was ruin. They met in a dimly lit parking garage beneath a high-rise downtown, reminiscent of a scene from a spy thriller. Rain dripped from overhead pipes, creating puddles that reflected the fluorescent glow of flickering lights. "You've really stepped in it this time, haven't you, Van Doren?" Daniel said, leaning against a concrete pillar, arms folded. Alexander exhaled heavily. "I need to protect my family, Dan. I messed up. Help me fix it." With a wry smile, Daniel nodded. "I'll do what I can. Get me her phone number, any email addresses, social media handles, anything. I'll see if there's something we can use to negotiate." Alexander handed over a small piece of paper with Anastasia's details. "Whatever you find, keep it quiet. I don't want to push her into a corner so badly that she lashes out. She's capable of anything right now." Daniel's eyes gleamed. Understood. Back at the mansion, Catherine sat in the nursery, feeding their daughter, whom they had named Elizabeth Grace Van Doren. The baby was a marvel, a tiny bundle of innocence and potential. Every coo and yawn tugged at Catherine's heart, reminding her of the life she wanted to protect, a life free from the shadow of scandal and betrayal. Alexander paced the hallway, phone in hand, awaiting Daniel's call. Eventually, it came. Daniel's voice crackled through the line. "I've found something." Anastasia had some questionable dealings with a private collector overseas. There might be grounds for accusing her of fraud or smuggling. The details are fuzzy, but the mere threat of exposing this might make her back off. Relief coursed through Alexander, though it was tainted by the bitterness of how low he was willing to sink. "All right, draft a statement. Send it to her. Make it clear that if she releases anything about me, I'll release what you found about her. Let's see if she calls our bluff." An uneasy truce settled over the Van Doren household as they waited for Anastasia's response. Days dragged on without any new media reports or blackmail messages. Catherine clung to hope, her focus shifting to Elizabeth's well-being. She began to imagine a future, maybe a smaller house, a calmer life. She'd even considered renting an apartment somewhere far away if the scandal erupted, determined to shield Elizabeth from the fallout. One afternoon, Catherine was in the living room, rocking Elizabeth in her arms while Alexander scrolled nervously through emails. Suddenly his phone buzzed. A message from Anastasia flashed across the screen. "You think you've outsmarted me? I'm not giving up that easily. Let's negotiate." Alexander glanced at Catherine. She nodded, silently urging him to handle the situation carefully. Responding promptly, Alexander typed, "We both have damaging information. Let's end this without mutual destruction. What do you want?" A minute passed, felt like an eternity before Anastasia's next message arrived. A sum of money. Enough to cover damages and lost opportunities. "Once I have it, I disappear. No more threats." Bile rose in Alexander's throat. He typed through gritted teeth, "Where and when?" She shot back a location, a chic cafe in the city, and a time, tomorrow afternoon. Alexander's mind churned. Meeting in public reduced the risk of confrontation, but it also meant there'd be watchful eyes. He'd have to be cautious. Catherine insisted on coming along, but Alexander shook his head. "We can't risk that. If we push her too hard, she might become vindictive again." Reluctantly, Catherine agreed, but she insisted on a safeguard. Alexander would wear a small recording device, courtesy of Daniel's connections, to capture any incriminating admissions. If Anastasia tried to renege or twist the agreement, they'd have tangible evidence to protect themselves. The next day arrived, overcast and drizzling. Alexander parked a few blocks from the cafe, briefcase in hand. Inside the case was a fraction of the money Anastasia demanded, with a promise of the rest to be wired to an account once she confirmed the destruction of all incriminating documents. Daniel lurked in a nearby car, ready to call the police if things went sideways. Alexander's heart hammered as he stepped inside. Anastasia was seated in a corner booth, wearing large sunglasses despite the grey day. She signaled him over, her smile a precarious blend of regret and defiance. "Busy day?" she asked, voice dripping with irony. Alexander ignored the small talk and placed the briefcase on the table. "Here's your partial payment. You'll get the rest when I have proof you've deleted every file and retracted every statement." Anastasia removed her sunglasses, revealing reddened eyes that hinted at sleepless nights. "You really believe I wanted it to come to this, Alexander? I loved you." A pang of something, guilt, pity, flickered across his face. "We both made mistakes, but you went too far, Anna. Blackmail isn't love." She sighed, tears threatening but never quite falling. "I just wanted the life you promised. Everything else was me lashing out." He slid a small flash drive across the table. "This contains evidence of your dealings abroad. Let this serve as a reminder not to cross me again." Her gaze hardened, and for a moment Alexander wondered if she might cause a scene. Instead, she took the flash drive, exhaling sharply. "Fine, I'll wipe the files, retract my leaks. But if you ever breathe a word about my dealings, I'll have my own backup plan. Do we understand each other?" Alexander nodded. The tension between them was suffocating, heavy with the ghosts of what might have been. With trembling hands, Anastasia unzipped the briefcase, checking the cash. Then she stood up, smoothing her coat. "You win, Alex. But trust me, life doesn't always hand out second chances. Whatever problems you had in your marriage, fix them, or you'll end up right back here." She brushed past him, leaving a faint trace of perfume in her wake. Outside, the drizzle had intensified into a steady rain. Alexander watched her disappear into the grey cityscape, a swirl of emotions too tangled to name. Part of him felt relief, another part sadness, and yet another part an unshakable sense of foreboding. Had he truly shut the door on this chapter, or had he merely postponed a worse disaster? Back in Westbridge Hills, Catherine waited anxiously by the fireplace, Elizabeth asleep in her nursery. When Alexander finally returned, drenched from the rain, she saw the exhaustion etched in every line on his face. Without speaking, he sank onto the sofa beside her. The crackling fire cast flickering shadows on the walls, as if echoing the turbulent shadows that still haunted them. "It's done," he said quietly. "She'll back off." Catherine searched his face for reassurance. "And the evidence? She'll destroy it?" He nodded, though not entirely convincingly. "That's what she agreed to." Reaching out, he took her hand, his voice trembling slightly. "Catherine, I know I've hurt you deeply. I know sorry doesn't fix everything, but I want to try, for Elizabeth, for us. I promise you, I'm finished with lies." She studied him for a long moment, her eyes reflecting both the pain of betrayal and the flicker of renewed hope. Finally, she spoke, her voice steady. "Then we'll try. We'll go to therapy, rebuild trust one day at a time. But I won't ever go back to how things were, Alexander. Our daughter deserves better than that." He nodded fervently. "She does. We all do." In the weeks that followed, life took on a new texture, cautious, subdued, but not without glimmers of promise. The public scandal never materialized. The media moved on to the next sensation, and Alexander's lawyers quietly settled any lingering legal concerns behind closed doors. The Charleston deal pulled through, albeit at a tighter margin, and Alexander scaled back his ambitions. Realizing he could no longer juggle illusions and deception with the role of husband and father, Catherine found solace in motherhood, bonding with Elizabeth in the nursery she had lovingly designed. She began writing poetry again, using her pen as a means to process the swirl of emotions. Piece by piece, the Van Doren mansion shifted from a battleground of secrets into a haven where forgiveness might just take root. They often reflected on the darkest hours, the forgotten birthday that set everything in motion, the confrontation with Anastasia at the mansion, the heartbreak that almost tore them apart. Yet through sheer tenacity and a baby's gentle laughter, they found the resolve to keep moving forward. A fragile peace had settled over their lives, but they knew it would take endless care to maintain. For Catherine, each dawn was a chance to decide anew whether to trust Alexander, to trust herself, and to trust in the future of their family. For Alexander, every kiss he placed on Elizabeth's forehead reminded him of the responsibility he bore, the vow he'd nearly broken beyond repair. "Let's make this work," Catherine would say, gazing at their daughter curled in her crib. "Yes," Alexander would echo, voice hushed with humility. "Let's make it work." And in that quiet promise, day by day, they chose each other, determined to cling to the precious gift of life that bound them together even after almost losing it all. And so ends the turbulent tale of Alexander and Catherine Van Doren, a cautionary reminder that even the wealthy cannot buy freedom from the consequences of betrayal. In the wake of heartbreak and near disaster, they stand at a crossroads where forgiveness is an everyday choice, and trust is rebuilt brick by painstaking brick. Anastasia's legacy haunts them still, a reminder of how quickly desire and deceit can unravel a life of apparent perfection. Yet in the fragile laughter of a newborn baby, Alexander and Catherine have found a reason to hope, a testament to the power of second chances.
What would you do if the man you loved, the man you legally married the father of your unborn child, tried to erase you not with a whisper, but with a spectacle? Imagine the most opulent wedding of the year, a gathering of the world's elite hosted at the legendary Biltmore estate. The groom, a self-made millionaire, the bride a society heiress. But as the vows are about to be spoken, the grand doors swing open, and there stands a woman, her presence silencing the entire hall. She isn't a guest. She isn't a jilted ex-girlfriend. She's his wife, and she's holding the one thing that can turn the entire glittering affair to ash, the real marriage certificate. Amelia wasn't born into Julian Thorne's world of shimmering glass towers and silent electric cars. Her world had been one of warm, crowded coffee shops, the smell of old books, and the shared dream of building something from nothing. They had met 7 years ago. He was a junior analyst with eyes that burned with an ambition that both thrilled and frightened her. She was a freelance graphic designer who saw the brilliant, insecure man behind the cheap, oversized suit. They fell in love over microwaved dinners in her tiny Brooklyn apartment, their laughter echoing louder than the sirens outside. He'd trace the lines of her palm and swear that one day those hands would never have to work again. Their wedding wasn't in a grand ballroom. It was a simple, heartfelt ceremony at the New York City Hall, with 2 of their closest friends as witnesses. The certificate, a simple document from the state of New York, felt more valuable than gold. It was their foundation, the legal and emotional bedrock of their life together. Julian framed a copy and hung it in their bedroom. "Us against the world," he'd whisper, kissing her forehead. And for a while, they were winning. Julian's ambition caught fire. His small tech startup, Thorn Industries, exploded. The Brooklyn apartment gave way to a sprawling penthouse overlooking Central Park. The cheap suit was replaced by custom-tailored Tom Ford. Amelia at first was his biggest cheerleader. She designed his company's first logo, celebrated every milestone, and grounded him when his ego threatened to soar into the stratosphere. But the higher he climbed, the more the air around him thinned. The man who once shared his deepest fears with her now spoke in quarterly reports and stock projections. Their intimate dinners were replaced by sterile charity galas, where she felt like another one of his prized possessions. Her simple elegance scrutinized by women dripping in diamonds. He began to travel more always for critical business. She'd call his hotel only to be told he'd left no forwarding number. He'd return smelling of a perfume that wasn't hers and an exhaustion that felt different from work. The signs were their small fissures in their foundation. A second phone he tried to hide. Vague answers to specific questions. A chilling distance in his eyes, even when he was holding her. Amelia tried to breach the divide. "Julian, we need to talk. I feel like I'm losing you." "Don't be dramatic, Amelia," he'd say, scrolling through his phone. "I'm building an empire for us, for our future. Isn't that what you wanted?" She had wanted a life with him, not an empire without him. The discovery that she was pregnant was for a fleeting moment, a ray of hope. This would save them. A child, their child, would be the anchor they needed. When she told him, his reaction was muted. He smiled, a practiced corporate smile that didn't reach his eyes. He kissed her a peck on the cheek. "That's wonderful news, darling. We'll have to hire a nanny, of course. Get the best." He didn't ask about her. He didn't place a hand on her still flat stomach. He just saw a new asset to be managed. The final soul-shattering blow came not from a confrontation, but from the glossy pages of a magazine. Her friend Chloe had come over, her face pale. She handed Amelia a copy of Tatler, the High Society Bible, and there it was, a lavish 10-page pred. "A thorn in Rocher's side, the merger of the century solidified by love." The article detailed the upcoming wedding between Julian Thorn, CEO of Thorn Industries, and Isabella Rocher, the daughter of industrial titan Jean-Pierre Rocher. The wedding was to be the social event of the decade, held at the historic Biltmore Estate in North Carolina. The accompanying photos showed Julian beaming his arm wrapped possessively around a stunning icy blonde. They looked ecstatic. They looked inevitable. Amelia felt the air leave her lungs. The magazine slipped from her numb fingers. It wasn't just an affair. He wasn't just leaving her. He was attempting to publicly and completely erase their existence. Their love, their vows, their life. All of it vaporized for a better business deal. He was going to commit bigamy in front of the entire world. The framed marriage certificate in their bedroom seemed to mock her. Us against the world. The world, it turned out, was Julian. For a full day, Amelia did nothing. She sat in the silent penthouse, the city lights twinkling below like a galaxy of indifferent stars. She didn't cry. The shock was too deep, a frozen shard of ice in her chest, where her heart used to be. The baby inside her gave a gentle flutter, a tiny, insistent reminder that she wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. On the second day, the ice began to crack, and white-hot fury took its place. He thought she was weak. He thought she was a relic of his past that he could simply discard. He had miscalculated. He had forgotten the woman who had believed in him when he had nothing. The woman who had helped build the very ladder he was now kicking away. She picked up the phone. She wasn't calling a friend to cry. She was calling the sharpest, most ruthless family law attorney in New York City. "My name is Amelia Thorne," she said, her voice steady and cold as steel. "My husband is Julian Thorne, and I need to stop a wedding." Marcus Vance was a man who operated in the silent, brutalist canyons of corporate and family law, where fortunes were won and lost on the fine print of a prenup. When Amelia Thorne walked into his office, he saw what most people saw: a beautifully fragile woman, her designer coat failing to hide the grief in her eyes. But when she spoke, he heard something else entirely. He heard precision. He heard fire. "He's not just cheating on me, Mr. Vance," Amelia began. Her hands clasped tightly on the polished mahogany table. "He is attempting to commit felony bigamy in a very public forum, presumably to secure a merger with Rocher Consolidated. He believes I will simply disappear." She laid it all out: the City Hall wedding, the years of shared life, the sudden emotional Arctic freeze, the pregnancy, and the Tatler article, which she placed on his desk. She then produced a certified copy of her marriage certificate. Marcus examined the document. It was perfect, ironclad, a public record. "He's either monumentally arrogant or monumentally stupid," Marcus mused, leaning back in his chair. "He's both," Amelia stated flatly. "His arrogance makes him believe he can get away with anything. His stupidity lies in underestimating me." "So what is the goal, Mrs. Thorne?" Marcus asked, his gaze sharp. "Do you want to file for divorce now? We can file an injunction to stop the wedding, serve him with papers quietly." Amelia shook her head, a slow, deliberate motion. "No. A quiet injunction is what he expects. He'd pay me off. His lawyers would bury me in paperwork and non-disclosure agreements. He'd paint me as a disgruntled, hysterical ex trying to extort him. The world would see him as the victim. The merger would still go through. No." She leaned forward, and for the first time Marcus saw the warrior beneath the porcelain skin. "I don't want to stop it quietly. I want to stop it publicly. I want to be the just cause when the officiant asks. I want every single one of his new powerful friends to see the fraud he is. I want Jean-Pierre Rocher to watch his daughter's fantasy crumble into illegal dust. I want to do it at the altar." Marcus was silent for a long moment. This was not the usual playbook. It was audacious, risky, and could blow back on her in unpredictable ways. It was also, he had to admit, brilliant. It was a strategy of maximum impact. "A public confrontation is a high-wire act," he warned. "They will have security. They will try to remove you, discredit you instantly. Which is why you'll be there, Amelia countered. Not next to me, but as a guest. You'll have copies of all the legal documents. When they try to throw me out, you step in. Not as my lawyer initially, but as an officer of the court, preventing a felony from being committed in his presence. You will be my legal shield. Over the next 2 weeks, they planned the operation with the precision of a military campaign. Marcus filed the initial divorce proceedings, but put a hold on having them served. The filing created a legal timestamp, proving her actions were premeditated and not a crime of passion. They gathered evidence photos of Amelia and Julian from over the years, affidavits from the friends who witnessed their wedding financial statements, showing their intertwined assets. Amelia, meanwhile, underwent her own transformation. She stopped grieving the man he was and started strategizing against the man he had become. She ate meticulously for the baby's health. She practiced calming breathing exercises, and she researched every member of the Rocher family and the Thorn Industries board. She was no longer a victim. She was a tactician. Her choice of attire was critical. She wouldn't go in rags or in horse-mourning black. That would be playing the victim. She chose a dress of deep sapphire blue, a color of royalty and power. It was elegant, impeccably tailored, and designed to accommodate her barely there 4-month bump. It was a statement of quiet, undeniable presence. The day before the wedding, Amelia flew to Charlotte, North Carolina, checking into a modest hotel far from the opulent resorts where the wedding guests were staying. Marcus was in a separate hotel already on site. They communicated via burner phones. That night alone in her room, a wave of doubt washed over her. The memory of the young, hopeful Julian, the one who kissed her in the rain, came flooding back. Was this vengeful, dramatic act truly who she was? Her hand went to her stomach. The baby kicked a strong, reassuring thump. It was the answer she needed. This wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. It was about protecting her child from a father who would deny his very existence for profit. It was about claiming her own story, not letting him write it for her. She took out the original marriage certificate from its protective folder. The paper felt heavy, real. It was the one truth in a sea of glittering lies. She slid it into her clutch, a slender, elegant weapon. The next morning, she got ready. Her makeup was understated, but flawless. Her hair was swept into a graceful chignon. She looked in the mirror and saw not the heart-broken wife from 2 weeks ago, but a woman she didn't recognize, and one she deeply admired. She was calm. She was ready. As the chauffeured car she'd hired drove her towards the sprawling fairy tale facade of the Biltmore estate, she knew this day would be the end of a chapter, but it would also be the explosive, unforgettable beginning of a new one. The Biltmore estate was even more breathtakingly ostentatious in person. It rose from the manicured North Carolina landscape like a French Renaissance chateau, a monument to old money, and today, to new lies. Hundreds of the world's wealthiest and most influential people milled about the grand lawn champagne flutes in hand, their polite laughter drowned out by the soaring notes of a string quartet. Amelia's car passed through the main security gate with an authentic-looking invitation Marcus had procured. She'd be just another face in the crowd until the moment was right. She walked through the throng of guests, a ghost from a life Julian had tried to bury. A few people gave her appreciative glances, noting the quiet elegance of her sapphire dress, assuming she was just another guest on the bride's side. The anonymity was a cloak. She found a position in the back of the grand hall where the ceremony was to take place. The room was a symphony of white roses and lilies, their cloying scent thick in the air. A crystal chandelier the size of a small car hung overhead, casting a brilliant, unforgiving light on everything. Then the music changed. The guests hushed. At the far end of the impossibly long aisle stood Julian. He was immaculate in his tuxedo, his face beaming with triumph. He looked every bit the master of the universe. He caught the eye of Jean-Pierre Rocher in the front row and gave a confident nod. This was the pinnacle of his life's work. Then came the bride. Isabella Rocher was a vision in white, a cascade of designer lace and diamonds. She was beautiful poised and walking towards a man who was already married. A pang of something close to pity struck Amelia, but it vanished as quickly as it came. Isabella was no innocent. The gleam in her eye was one of victory. She had won the ultimate prize. Amelia's heart began to pound a frantic drum against her ribs. She took a slow, deep breath, her hand unconsciously moving to her stomach. "Stay calm. Your moment is coming." The ceremony was a blur of sanctimonious pronouncements about love, trust, and eternal union. Amelia felt a bitter laugh rise in her throat, but swallowed it down. Finally, the officiant, a serene-looking man, who was likely paid a fortune for his role in this charade, reached the pivotal moment. He smiled benevolently at the crowd. "Before these two are joined in matrimony, if there is anyone present who has any just cause why they may not be lawfully joined together, let them speak now or forever. Hold their peace." A beat of expectant silence. This was it. From the back of the hall, a single clear voice cut through the stillness. "I do." Every head swiveled. The collective gasp was a physical force. Amelia stepped out from the shadows of the rear archway. Her heels clicked with deliberate, measured slowness on the marble floor as she began to walk down the aisle, a solitary figure in deep blue moving against a tide of white. Julian's face went through a rapid, sickening series of transformations. First confusion, then disbelief. His eyes widened, his skin paling to a waxy grey beneath his expensive tan. Isabella looked at him, her perfect smile faltering. "Julian." "Who is that?" Beatrice Thorne. Julian's formidable mother, in the front row, shot Amelia a look of pure venom. "Security. Remove this woman at once." Two large men in black suits started moving towards her. But Amelia didn't stop. Her eyes were locked on Julian's. "You don't recognize me, Julian?" She called out, her voice not loud, but carrying in the acoustically perfect hall. It was the voice he heard every day for 7 years. "Perhaps you've forgotten. It's easy to forget things when you're so busy." She was halfway down the aisle now. The guests were on their feet, murmuring phones, starting to discreetly emerge. This was better than a soap opera. "My name," she announced, her voice gaining strength, "is Amelia Thorne, and my just cause for stopping this wedding," she paused, letting the silence stretch, "is the fact that Julian Thorne is already my husband." A wave of shock rippled through the room. Isabella let out a small, strangled cry and took a step back from Julian, as if he were suddenly radioactive. "She's lying." Julian finally found his voice, a strained, desperate bark. "She's a delusional ex-girlfriend I had years ago. She's obsessed. Security, get her out of here." The security guards reached for Amelia's arms. "I wouldn't touch her if I were you," a calm, authoritative voice said. Marcus Vance rose from his seat in the third row, straightening his tie. "Assaulting a pregnant woman tends to look very bad on the evening news." The word pregnant dropped like a bomb into the already volatile atmosphere. Isabella Rocher visibly swayed her hand, flying to her mouth. Jean-Pierre Rocher's face was a mask of thunder. And she is not delusional, Marcus continued, walking, to stand a respectful distance from Amelia. She is in fact the legal Mrs. Julian Thorne. Prove it, Julian snarled, his composure shattering completely. This is a pathetic shakedown. Amelia had reached the front. She was now standing just a few feet from them, the unholy trinity at the altar. She looked at Julian, her expression not one of hatred, but of profound, sorrowful disappointment. You really should have remembered where you put this, Julian, she said softly. From her elegant clutch, she pulled out a folded document. With a flick of her wrist, she opened it. It was the original State of New York marriage certificate, the embossed seal gleaming under the chandelier light. We were married on October 14th, 7 years ago, at New York City Hall. Our witnesses were Sarah and Ben Carter. I am 4 months pregnant with his child. Amelia said, her voice now resonating with absolute, unshakable truth. This ceremony is a fraud. The man you are about to marry, Isabella, is a bigamist and a liar. She held up the certificate for all to see. In the dead silence of the hall, the only sound was the frantic clicking of a guest's phone camera, a sound that signaled the beginning of the end for Julian Thorne. The moment the certificate was revealed, the carefully constructed fantasy of the day didn't just crack. It detonated. The scene at the altar devolved into pure, unscripted chaos. Isabella Rocher stared at the document, then at Julian's ashen face, her own a canvas of dawning horror. Julian, she whispered, her voice trembling. Tell me this is a joke. Tell me she's a lunatic. But Julian was cornered, a trapped animal. His eyes darted from Amelia's unwavering gaze to Isabella's pleading face to her father's murderous expression. It's complicated, he stammered the worst possible answer. Complicated! Jean-Pierre Rocher's voice boomed from the front row as he strode forward, his face purple with rage. My daughter's wedding is being crashed by your secret wife, who is carrying your secret child, and you call it complicated. You have 5 seconds to explain this before I personally tear your fraudulent empire apart. The guests were no longer even pretending to be polite. Phones were out everywhere, recording the magnificent social implosion. The string quartet had long since trailed off into a discordant squeak. Whispers turned into audible gasps and frantic speculation. He's married to her. She looks so normal. Did you hear? She's pregnant. This is a bigger scandal than the Van Adler divorce. Julian, finally realizing his usual tactics of bluster and denial were useless, tried a new deflection. He rounded on Amelia, his face contorted with a vicious snarl. You did this to ruin me. You were never happy with my success. You're a vindictive gold digger. Amelia didn't flinch. I was with you when your only gold was the filling in your tooth, Julian. I supported you. This isn't about your success. It's about your character, or the lack thereof. Get out! Shrieked Beatrice Thorne. Julian's mother, her face a mask of fury. She lunged towards Amelia, her lacquered nails poised like claws. You will not destroy my son. Before she could reach her, Marcus Vance stepped smoothly between them. Ma'am, I suggest you calm yourself. What your son has done here constitutes attempted bigamy, a Class E felony in this state. My client is the victim here. Every person with a camera phone is a witness. I strongly advise the Thorne family to stop talking. His words, calm and laced with legal menace, had a chilling effect. Beatrice froze. Jean-Pierre Rocher, a man who understood the language of legal and financial consequence better than anyone, took a deep, shuddering breath. He looked at Julia with utter contempt. "The deal is off," he said, his voice low and deadly. "The merger is dead. You will be hearing from my lawyers. You have publicly humiliated my daughter and attempted to defraud my family. I will see to it that by this time next year, the name Thorn Industries is nothing but a footnote in bankruptcy filings." He turned his back on Julian and wrapped a protective arm around his now sobbing daughter. "Let's go, Isabella." The Rocher family, a formidable unit, turned and began to walk away, a clear and public declaration of war. The dam broke. The guests, sensing the spectacle was over and not wanting to be caught in the fallout, began to flee as if the building were on fire. The hall, once filled with the promise of a glorious union, was now a scene of mass exodus. White roses were trampled underfoot. A forgotten champagne flute lay shattered on the floor. Julian stood alone amidst the wreckage, his perfect tuxedo now looking like a costume on a broken mannequin. He looked at Amelia, his eyes filled not with remorse, but with a horrifying, venomous hatred. This was all her fault. In his mind, she was the author of his destruction, not his own actions. "You will regret this, Amelia," he hissed, his voice barely a whisper. "I will leave you with nothing. You and that thing inside you." The threat, so raw and cruel, finally pierced Amelia's armor of calm. For a second, fear flickered in her eyes. But then she looked past him at the empty aisle, at the wilting flowers, at the ruins of his ambition. He had already lost. He just didn't know it yet. "You have nothing left to take, Julian," she said, her voice quiet but firm. She turned Marcus at her side and began to walk away, leaving him standing alone at the altar of his own making. As she passed the last pew, she could hear the first siren in the distance. The media had arrived. The story was just beginning. The Biltmore estate was no longer a fairy tale castle. It was a media siege camp. News vans with satellite dishes crowded the majestic entrance. Reporters shouted questions, their camera flashes like machine gun fire. Marcus, a master of navigating such chaos, had arranged for a private security team to escort them out through a service exit and into a waiting black SUV. As they sped away, Amelia finally let out the breath she felt like she'd been holding for 2 weeks. Her body slumped against the leather seat, the adrenaline beginning to ebb, leaving a profound, hollow exhaustion in its wake. "It's done," she whispered. "The public part is," Marcus corrected gently, handing her a bottle of water. "The private war is about to begin. He's not just going to roll over." He was right. By the time they landed back in New York, Julian had already launched his counteroffensive. A statement was released by a high-priced crisis PR firm. It painted Amelia as an emotionally disturbed and estranged wife from whom Julian had been separated for years. It claimed the divorce was imminent, and that Amelia's actions were a desperate and calculated attempt to extort a larger settlement. It was a classic smear campaign designed to muddy the waters and salvage what little was left of his reputation. Amelia felt a surge of nausea that had nothing to do with her pregnancy. He was trying to gaslight the entire world. They gathered in Marcus's office, which they now referred to as the War Room. It was stark white, overlooking the city, a sterile command center for the messy battle ahead. "His play is obvious," Marcus said, pacing in front of a whiteboard. "He'll file a motion to have you psychologically evaluated. He'll claim you're unfit. He'll try to use the pregnancy against you, saying your hormones are making you unstable. He wants to discredit you as a witness to his own life." "But we have the marriage certificate, the photos, the witnesses," Amelia argued, her voice rising, And he has millions of dollars to hire lawyers who can create doubt out of thin air, Marcus countered. We need more leverage. Something he can't spin. Something that hits him not in his reputation that's already shot, but in his wallet and his ego. For the next few days, Amelia felt like she was drowning in legal documents and strategic discussions. Julian served her with divorce papers, so aggressive they bordered on harassment, demanding full custody of the unborn child he had publicly denied, and claiming she was an unfit mother. It was a cruel, transparent tactic to scare her into submission. It did the opposite. It erased any lingering sentimentality she had for the man she once loved. This was no longer Julian. This was an enemy. She started digging, not just with Marcus's legal team, but on her own. She spent late nights combing through old emails, bank statements, and documents from the early days of Thorn Industries, a life he thought she had forgotten. She was looking for a vulnerability, a crack in his financial armor. And then she found it. It was in a dusty box in her closet, filled with memorabilia from their first apartment. Tucked inside an old photo album was a document she had barely understood at the time. When Thorn Industries was just a concept, a dream sketched on a napkin, Julian needed a small amount of seed money to incorporate the company. He didn't have it. His parents had refused, calling his venture a pipe dream. Amelia had just received a modest inheritance from her grandmother. It wasn't much, just $50,000, but to them it was a fortune. She had given it all to him without a second thought. In return, he had jubilantly presented her with an official-looking stock certificate. "You're not just my wife, Ames," he had said, kissing her. "You're a founding partner. This makes you a 5% owner of Thorn Industries. One day this piece of paper will be worth millions." She had laughed and put it away, its value purely sentimental. Over the years, as the company grew and went through various rounds of financing, Julian had presented her with stacks of new documents to sign. "Just legal formalities for the new investors, darling," he'd say dismissively. Trusting him, she had signed. She assumed her initial 5% had been diluted into oblivion, worth less than the paper it was printed on. Julian certainly acted as though it had. She brought the certificate to Marcus. "Is this anything?" Marcus took the document, his eyes scanning the formal text the company sealed the date. He was silent for a full minute. Then he looked up, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. "Amelia," he said, his voice filled with awe. "This is everything," he explained. Julian had indeed tried to dilute her shares. The papers he'd had her sign were attempts to convert her powerful founder's shares into common stock, which would have rendered them nearly worthless. However, the original incorporation agreement had a clause Amelia herself had insisted on after reading a Business for Dummies book, that any change to the status of founders' shares required a separate notarized affidavit of consent, explicitly explaining the dilution. Julian had never gotten that affidavit. In his arrogance, he thought the sheaf of papers he'd had her sign was enough. He had buried the truth under a mountain of jargon, assuming she would never check. "According to this," Marcus said, tapping the certificate, "you are not a 5% owner of the current Thorn Industries. Due to stock splits and anti-dilution clauses, you didn't even know you had your original stake, means you own 22% of the entire company. You are the single largest individual shareholder. Larger than Julian." Amelia stared at him, her mind reeling. "What does that mean?" "It means," Marcus said, the smile widening, "that you don't have to fight him for a settlement. It means you can call a board meeting. It means you have the power to fire him from his own company." The game had just changed. This was no longer a divorce. It was a corporate takeover. The discovery of the stock certificate in the dusty box was like finding a master key in the middle of a maze. Amelia stared at the ornate, slightly yellowed paper, a relic from a more hopeful time. She remembered the day Julian gave it to her, his face flush with excitement, calling her his founding partner. To her, it had been a romantic gesture, a symbol of their shared dream. To him, it had clearly become an inconvenient detail, a loose end he thought he had long since tied up and buried. In the sterile confines of the war room, Marcus Vance initially viewed the document with professional skepticism. Amelia, in most cases like this, these initial shares are diluted to worthlessness over years of fundraising and restructuring. He probably assumes it's just sentimental paper. He presented me with other documents to sign over the years. Amelia admitted, a knot of dread tightening in her stomach. For new investors, he said, just formalities. Marcus's eyes narrowed. Let me see the company's articles of incorporation, their public record. For 10 minutes, the only sounds in the room were the clicking of his keyboard and the frantic beating of Amelia's heart. He pulled up documents on the large screen, his eyes darting between the original certificate and the digital files. A strange stillness came over him. That absolute arrogant fool! He whispered more to himself than to her. He slowly leaned back in his chair, a look of stunned admiration on his face. Amelia. He made a mistake. A colossal one. He explained, his voice gaining excitement with every word. The original incorporation agreement, the bedrock of the entire company, contained a clause, the very one she had insisted on, inspired by a late-night reading binge of business books. It stipulated that any alteration to the ownership class or rights of founders' shares required a separate, dedicated, notarized affidavit of consent, wherein the potential dilution was explicitly detailed in plain language. Julian, in his haste and towering self-assurance, had buried the conversion attempts in complex legal jargon within stacks of other investment paperwork. He had never gotten that specific separate affidavit. He assumed she'd never notice. He didn't just fail to dilute you, Marcus said, standing up and beginning to pace. The anti-dilution provisions attached to founders' shares, which you never waived, have been triggering with every funding round. Every time he sold a piece of the company, the charter protected your piece. According to these filings, and accounting for 2 stock splits. He stopped and turned to her, his eyes wide. Amelia, you don't own 5%. You own 22%. You are the single largest individual shareholder of Thorn Industries. You own more of it than he does. The air left Amelia's lungs. It wasn't just a weapon. It was an mental arsenal. She wasn't fighting for scraps from his table anymore. She owned the table. A slow, cold fire began to burn in her veins. The grief she had carried for weeks finally burned away, leaving behind something new purpose. The strategy shifted instantly. The defensive crouch became an aggressive forward lean. The first move was executed with the quiet lethality of a sniper's bullet. Through a prestigious, unaffiliated corporate law firm in Delaware, they formally filed the paperwork to have Amelia's share certificate authenticated and her ownership status officially recorded with Thorn Industries Board and the SEC. There was no press release, no announcement. Just a procedural filing that would land like a declaration of war on the desk of Julian's general counsel. The fallout was immediate. Within hours, Marcus's phone began to ring incessantly. Panicked, blustering calls from Julian's legal team were met with calm, unassailable facts. We are simply correcting a long-standing clerical error in the company's share registry. Marcus would state blandly, refusing to be drawn into an argument. The power dynamic had been irrevocably altered. Julian's motions to have her psychologically evaluated were quietly withdrawn. It was one thing to call a heartbroken wife unstable. It was quite another to level that accusation at your company's largest shareholder. With Julian's camp reeling, Amelia prepared for the second, more public strike. Marcus arranged an exclusive sit-down interview, not with a tabloid journalist who would focus on the salacious details, but with Eleanor Vance, no relation, a senior columnist for the Wall Street Journal, renowned for her sharp, unflinching analysis of corporate America. They prepped for days. Amelia wouldn't be a woman scorned. She would be a guardian of shareholder value. Dressed in a severe but elegant grey suit, she met the journalist in a neutral hotel conference room. She was calm, articulate, and masterful. "Ms. Thorne," the journalist began, "the world knows about the events at the Biltmore. Your husband's camp has painted it as a domestic dispute spilling into public view." "That is the narrative Mr. Thorne would prefer," Amelia responded coolly. "However, I am not here today as a wife. I am here as a founder and the primary shareholder of Thorne Industries, and as such I have a fiduciary duty to address the catastrophic lapse in judgment demonstrated by our CEO. The attempted fraudulent merger with Roche Consolidated was not a domestic issue. It was a corporate action that has exposed this company to billions in legal liability and has erased nearly 40% of our market value in 2 weeks. That is a boardroom issue." She spoke of her deep concern for the company's thousands of employees whose jobs and pensions were put at risk by reckless, ego-driven leadership. She never called Julian a liar. She referred to his verifiably false statements to a potential business partner. She never called him a cheat. She spoke of a breach of the morals clause in his executive employment contract. The final question was pointed. "So what are you going to do?" Amelia looked directly into the camera, her expression one of grim resolve. "The brand's reputation has been severely compromised. Shareholder confidence has been shattered. To protect the future of this company, immediate and decisive action is required. I have therefore used my position as the leading shareholder to formally petition the board for an emergency meeting. The sole item on the agenda will be a vote of no confidence in the current CEO and a motion for his immediate removal." The article landed like a thunderclap. The stock, which had been bleeding out, didn't just stabilize, it jumped 8%. The market understood. This wasn't chaos. It was a coup. It was a course correction. The emergency board meeting was held 3 days later on the 50th floor. The air in the boardroom was thick with tension and the smell of expensive coffee. The 10 board members sat stiffly around the massive obsidian table. Julian at its head looked gaunt and furious. He watched Amelia enter, flanked by Marcus and a team of corporate lawyers, his eyes burning with a hatred so pure it was almost tangible. She met his gaze with the cool indifference one might show a failing piece of equipment. Ignoring the seat Marcus indicated along the side, Amelia walked to the opposite head of the table, creating a polar opposition to Julian. She remained standing. Julian's ally on the board, a man named Henderson, tried to seize control. "This meeting is a farce, a transparently hostile maneuver, born of a marital dispute. It is an abuse of corporate process." Before Marcus could respond, Amelia held up a hand. "Mr. Henderson," she said, her voice cutting through the tension, "my marriage is over. We are not here to discuss it. We are here to discuss the $300 million in shareholder value that Mr. Thorne has personally incinerated in the last month. We are here to discuss the impending multi-billion-dollar lawsuit from Roche Consolidated. We are here to discuss our company's brand being used as a punchline on late-night television. My personal life is the context, but his professional incompetence is the agenda. Do you understand the distinction? Henderson fell silent. Amelia's gaze swept across the table, meeting the eyes of each director. I am not here to ask, but to inform. Under his leadership, this company is facing an existential threat brought on not by market forces, but by one man's personal failings. As the person with the most to lose and the most to protect, I am fulfilling my duty. She straightened her shoulders. I hereby table a motion for a vote of no confidence in CEO Julian Thorne, and for his immediate termination for cause citing gross negligence and breach of his fiduciary and contractual duties. Julian shot to his feet, his chair scraping violently against the floor. You will not do this. This is my company. I built it from nothing. You built it with my money, Amelia retorted, her voice dropping to a deadly quiet. You built it on a foundation you thought was made of my love and loyalty, but it was also made of my stock, and you have run it into the ground with your pride. The board will now vote. The lead director, a stern-faced man named Caldwell, knew there was no other choice. One by one, he called their names. The votes came in, some reluctant, others grimly resolute. The sycophants abstained. The serious directors, the ones who saw their own fortunes dwindling, sided with the woman who had a plan. The motion carries, Caldwell announced into the stunned silence. 7-3. Julian Thorne is removed as CEO of Thorne Industries, effective immediately. Julian sank into his chair, a choked, guttural sound escaping his lips. The king was dead, and the queen, standing serene and resolute at the head of the table, was just beginning her reign. The silence that fell over the boardroom in the wake of the vote was more profound than any shouting match. It was the sound of a king being deposed in his own court. Julian Thorne, who had entered the room, a titan, seemed to shrink before their very eyes. The bespoke suit that had once projected power now hung on him, like a costume for a part he could no longer play. He stared at Amelia, his eyes a swirling vortex of disbelief, hatred, and for the first time a sliver of genuine fear. The lead independent director cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud. Julian, as per the board's resolution, your access to company systems will be terminated immediately. Security will escort you to your office to collect your personal belongings. The walk from the boardroom to his office was the longest of Julian's life. He passed secretaries who suddenly found their keyboards fascinating, executives who looked away, and junior analysts who stared with a mixture of awe and pity. These were the people who had feared him, revered him, and envied him. Now he was a ghost haunting the halls of his own fallen empire. Amelia did not watch him go. She remained in the boardroom, coolly discussing transition logistics with the board, her voice the calm epicenter of the storm he had created. Her victory was not in his humiliation, but in her own quiet, unassailable control. For their final meeting, Amelia chose the battlefield of their shared history, the sprawling penthouse overlooking Central Park. When Julian arrived, he found it cold and sterile. The vibrant art they had collected was gone, replaced by pale squares on the walls. The custom furniture was shrouded in white dust sheets, giving the room the atmosphere of a mausoleum. It was a home no longer merely a high-value asset, awaiting liquidation. He was a trespasser in his own past. Amelia stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, a silhouette against the glittering cityscape. She didn't turn when he entered. She let the silence stretch, forcing him to confront the emptiness he had wrought. Her hand rested protectively on her now prominent baby bump, a clear and present symbol of the future he had discarded. Finally, he broke. "What do you want, Amelia?" His voice was a rasp, stripped of its usual confidence. "You've taken my company. You've taken my reputation. You've won. What's the point of this final spectacle?" "This isn't a spectacle, Julian," she replied, her voice soft but echoing in the cavernous room. She turned to face him, her eyes clear and devoid of the hatred he expected. What he saw was far more devastating. It was pity. "This is an exit interview. I wanted to look you in the eye one last time, not as my husband or my enemy, but as the co-founder of a life we once planned to build." She gestured to the shrouded furniture. "I remember when we bought that sofa. You were so proud because it was the first thing we bought that wasn't from a second-hand store. You told me it was the beginning of our empire. An empire for us." She took a step closer, her gaze unwavering. "You were the one who turned our life into a business, Julian. A series of assets and liabilities. So I learned to speak your language. I'm just here today to finalize the dissolution of our partnership." He flinched, the words striking him more painfully than any shout. "So what are the terms? What pound of flesh do you want now?" "I don't want your flesh. I want my freedom. And more importantly, I want my child's," she stated. "So here are the terms of your surrender. First, the divorce will be uncontested. You will not fight it. You will not delay it. You will sign whatever is put in front of you. The settlement will be generous, drawn from your personal assets, the accounts and properties that predate my involvement on the board. I am leaving you with more than enough to disappear and start again. I am not leaving you destitute. That was your plan for me, not mine for you. Second, she continued, her voice hardening, you will sign away any and all legal claim and parental rights to this child. You will have no custody, no visitation, no contact, ever." A flicker of his old entitled self ignited. "You can't do that. He's my son. My blood." "Is he?" Amelia's voice was laced with ice. "You stood before God and 1,000 people and prepared to commit a felony, an act that would have legally declared this child illegitimate. You stood in that grand hall and called him a thing inside me. You don't get to claim him in the dark after you denied him in the light. This isn't a punishment, Julian. It's a protection. I am protecting my son or my daughter from a father who sees love as a liability and family as a merger opportunity. They deserve to be cherished, not leveraged. The child will bear the Thorn name because it is a legacy I have now cleaned and redeemed. They will inherit the better part of it. Finally," she said, walking over to a starkly modern coffee table, the only piece not covered by a sheet. On it sat a single thick folder. "You will sign this. It's a mutual non-disclosure and non-disparagement agreement, ironclad and perpetual. You will never speak of me or my child to anyone. Not to the press, not to your friends, not in a tell-all memoir 10 years from now. You will become a ghost, and in return I will afford you the same courtesy. The world will move on, and Julian Thorn will simply be a business footnote." He stared at the folder, a bitter, broken laugh escaping his lips. "And if I refuse? What if I decide to drag this through the mud for years?" Amelia looked at him, not with anger, but with a weary finality. "I truly hoped you wouldn't ask that, but I planned for it. If you refuse, then tomorrow morning, as acting chairwoman of the board, I will authorize a full deep dive forensic audit of Thorn Industries, covering the entire period of your CEO tenure. We'll bring in the best investigative accountants in the country. She let the threat hang in the air. I wonder what they'll find. Perhaps we could start with the undeclared corporate accounts in the Cayman Islands you used for the Rocher deal's preliminary gifts, or the millions in consulting fees paid to shell corporations that trace back to your mother. Or maybe just the simple common fraud of using corporate funds for the down payment on Isabella's ridiculous engagement ring. I was your partner for 7 years, Julian. I know where you cut the corners. She saw the blood drain from his face. She had him, completely. You have 2 paths, and you will choose one now. You can sign this folder, take your millions, and vanish with some dignity intact. Or you can refuse, and I will dedicate a significant portion of the company's resources to ensuring your next board meetings are with the district attorney. Choose. Slowly, like a man moving underwater, he walked to the table. His hand trembled as he reached for the pen. He didn't read the documents. He knew it didn't matter. He signed page after page, his signature, once a bold assertion of power, now the hurried scrawl of a defeated man. He pushed the folder back towards her and turned to leave a stooped figure silhouetted against the door. He didn't look back. Amelia stood alone in the quiet, empty room for a long time, listening to the hum of the city. There was no triumphant surge, no thrill of victory. There was only a vast, quiet, and profound sense of peace. The war was over. The weight she had carried for so long had finally been lifted. She placed both hands on her belly, feeling the strong, steady kick of the new life within. This was her true north, the reason for the fight, the purpose for the victory. Her future was no longer an empire of glass and steel, but one of unconditional love and limitless possibility. She wasn't a scorned wife or a corporate raider. She was Amelia Thorn, a mother, and she was finally, irrevocably free. In the end, this wasn't just a story about a wedding crashed or a cheater exposed. It was a story about the immense power that lies dormant in those who are underestimated. Amelia Thorn walked into that hall as a victim and walked out as a victor, not because of revenge, but because she chose to fight for her truth with intelligent strategy and unwavering courage. She proved that the strongest foundations aren't built on money or fame, but on integrity and self-worth. She didn't just reclaim her life. She rebuilt an empire on her own terms for the future of the one person who mattered most, her child. What would you have done in her shoes? Let us know in the comments below. If you were captivated by Amelia's journey from heartbreak to power, please give this video a like, share it with someone who loves a story of ultimate justice, and be sure to subscribe to our channel for more unforgettable stories of strength, drama, and empowerment. Click that notification bell so you never miss a single moment. Thank you for listening.